I think we all want God's blessing, or we want to be blessed by God or find favor with God. Well, the psalmist said, blessed or blessed is the man. Okay, and to find that blessing from God, that man does not walk in the counsel of the ungodly, doesn't stand in the path of sinners, nor does he sit in the seat of the scornful. Basically, he tries to get away from ungodly people. He tries to avoid ungodly people. People that he knows is going to lead him astray. People that he knows is going to lead him in the wrong path in life. People that he knows is probably going to lead him into some sort of a temptation in his life. Basically, the godly person does his best to avoid those types of people. Another way that we can look at verse 1 is this. The psalmist is describing three postures, three places or platforms of information, and three ways to describe evil people. Let's look at it. First off, he talks about walking, standing, and sitting. Walking, standing, and sitting describes those three postures of life. We walk with somebody. Have you ever had somebody ask you to walk with them, or maybe you ask somebody to walk with you, and while you walk together you discuss something or you exchanged information? Standing, have you ever stood for something or stood for a person, or maybe you had someone stand up with you in regards to something? I remember whenever I got married, my dad stood up with me as my best man and was the best man in my wedding. And sometimes we even sit down with somebody to discuss something. Secondly, let's change colors here. Let's look at those three places or platforms of information. Okay, that godly person, he walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, doesn't stand in the path of sinners, nor does he sit in the seat of the scornful. Okay, let's look at that first on the counsel. We receive counsel, or we receive education. Secondly, the path we follow, maybe a career path, or we follow a path of life, or paths of learning. In the seat, we sit in seats of learning, or a seat of education. And what I'm trying to maybe say here is avoid liberal colleges, avoid the liberal news media, or maybe you've been placed into a seat of authority. And then last of all, he describes those three types of ungodly people that you meet out in the world. You can see it. The ungodly. Okay, these are just the people who just live in an immoral lifestyle. That's the first one. Secondly, you see that word sinner. People who just live in a blatant, open, sinful lifestyle. And last of all, you see the scornful. I think another word that we could use there is the word scoffer, or just a person who pokes fun of faith. And these three things in many ways represent our daily lives and activities, our learning, along with all of our life choices, and where we're going to get our direction, education, and counsel from, and who we're going to encounter whenever we go out into the world. Now, even though the psalmist seems to enjoy writing in threes, all this can be really boiled down to two things and a choice between those two things. In other words, the psalmist is basically saying there are really only two paths in life. Okay, let me change colors once again. Okay, there's a way of faithfulness or Christ-centeredness. There's that Christ-centered path that we could follow, or we could follow a wicked or an ungodly path in life. And basically, there really are only two paths in life, a way of faithfulness or a way of Christ-centeredness that leads to a satisfied or a blessed life, a life that finds favor with God, or there is a way of wickedness that leads really to death and destruction. Now, Jesus in the gospel, he called these two paths, he called it the broad way and the narrow way. Jesus said in Matthew, drop my pen here, Matthew 7:13 and 14. Let me write this on here. Matthew 7:13 and 14. Jesus said, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it." Now, something that Jesus seems to expose here in Matthew 7:13 and 14, as well as the psalmist seems to expose here in Psalm 1 verse 1, is there is no middle ground. That there is no middle ground, or you can't ride the fence, so to say. You're either on the broad way or you're on the narrow way. That you can't ride in the middle of these two roads. That there's no ATV trail or walking path or bike path between these two roads. You're either on the broad way or you're on the narrow way. Probably the best way that I could put this, or maybe even the simplest way that I could put this, is either you're in Christ or you're not in Christ. You're Christ-centered or you're not Christ-centered. You're going to heaven or you're not going to heaven. You're going to hell or you're not going to hell. You're either in Christ or you're not in Christ. And that really is the choice that all this boils down to. But with that, this is really the biggest decision you're ever going to make in your entire life. The choice of whether or not you're going to choose to follow Jesus Christ. And if you've never done that, then ask Christ by faith to come into your heart and let Jesus Christ be the Lord of your life.